The anxiety sleep loop. Worrying makes it biologically worse. You lie down, the room is dark, the house is quiet, everything is exactly how it should be. And then your brain turns on. Not gently, not slowly, I mean it launches. Suddenly, you're replaying that awkward thing you said in a meeting 3 weeks ago. Then you're calculating how many hours of sleep you'll get if you fall asleep right now. Then you're worrying about whether all this worrying is somehow ruining your health. Then you're worrying about the worrying about the worrying. Sound familiar? If you're watching this, I already know the answer. Here's what I want you to understand before we go any further. You are not broken. You are not uniquely cursed. You don't have some rare condition that makes sleep impossible for you specifically. What you have is a loop, a biological, measurable, neuroscientifically documented loop where anxiety disrupts sleep and poor sleep amplifies anxiety, and that amplified anxiety makes the next night worse, and the cycle just keeps feeding itself until sleep feels less like rest and more like a nightly performance you're terrified of failing. And here's the part that genuinely surprised me when I first went deep into this research. The worry itself, the act of lying there anxious about sleep, is physically, chemically making it harder to fall asleep. Not just in your head, in your brain chemistry, in your nervous system, in your hormones. That's what we're unpacking today. The full science of the anxiety sleep loop, why it works the way it does, and most importantly, how to actually break it. Let's get into it. So let's start at the beginning. What actually happens in your brain when you lie down anxious? Your brain has a structure called the amygdala. Think of it as your internal alarm system. Its entire job is to scan for threat and trigger a response when it finds one. For most of human evolutionary history, that threat was physical, a predator, a rival, a dangerous environment. But here's the problem. The brain can respond to thoughts of threat as if danger were actually present. When you lie in bed and your brain generates a stressful thought, what if I don't sleep? What if I fail tomorrow? What if this never gets better? Your amygdala can react to that imagined threat surprisingly similarly to a real one. And what does it do in response? It triggers your sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight system, the biological emergency response that evolution designed to keep you alive. Your cortisol levels rise, your heart rate increases, your core body temperature goes up slightly. Your brain waves shift from the slow, calm patterns associated with drowsiness into the fast, high-frequency patterns associated with, you guessed it, being wide awake. This is the core mechanism. Anxiety activates the fight or flight system, and the fight or flight system is biologically incompatible with sleep. Sleep requires your body to feel safe. The moment your brain registers threat, even a thought-generated one, that sense of safety disappears. Sleep researchers have a term for what happens next: hyperarousal. Not just regular wakefulness, but a state of heightened neurological and physiological activation that sits at the center of almost every case of chronic insomnia. Studies using EEG technology have shown that people with anxiety-driven insomnia display measurably higher levels of beta wave activity at night. Beta waves are what your brain produces when you're alert, focused, and cognitively active, when you're problem-solving, when you're on guard. People without sleep problems show a natural decline in beta wave activity as bedtime approaches, a gradual shift down into the slower waves of deep sleep. But when anxiety is in the picture, that decline often doesn't happen. The brain stays stuck in high gear. And here's the part that trips most people up. The harder you try to push it into sleep, the more activated it becomes. This is why trying harder to sleep tends to make everything worse. Sleep is an involuntary process, and effort works against involuntary processes. You cannot try your way into sleep any more than you can try your way into a sneeze. The moment I need to fall asleep becomes a goal your anxious brain is pursuing, sleep becomes work, and work keeps you awake. But that's only half the loop. Here's the part that most people's understanding completely misses. You might think, okay, anxiety disrupts sleep. That's basically common sense. but the disrupted sleep itself is actively generating more anxiety the next day. This is physiology, not metaphor. When you lose deep sleep and REM sleep, which anxiety commonly fragments or reduces, something measurable happens inside your amygdala. A landmark study from UC Berkeley, led by neuroscientist Matthew Walker and his team, used brain imaging to compare amygdala reactivity in well-rested versus sleep-deprived subjects. The result was striking. Sleep-deprived brains showed up to 60% more amygdala reactivity to negative emotional stimuli compared to rested brains. That's the difference between your alarm system working normally and it going off constantly, treating everything as an emergency. Not only that, sleep deprivation also disrupts the connection between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the rational, perspective-giving part of your brain. Under normal conditions, it acts as a brake on the amygdala, saying, "Calm down, it's not actually a threat, it's just a thought." But when you haven't slept, that brake weakens. The amygdala runs with less regulation. Small problems feel larger. Minor uncertainties feel heavier. And lying in bed the next night, your brain generates even more anxious thoughts, which trigger more cortisol, which causes more hyperarousal, which makes sleep even harder. The loop is now fully closed. Anxiety causes poor sleep. Poor sleep causes more anxiety. And on, night after night. There's one more layer to this, and it's the part that often catches people off guard. When the loop has been running long enough, you don't just dread not sleeping, you start dreading bedtime itself. Researchers call this conditioned arousal. Your brain is extremely good at associative learning. Whatever emotions you repeatedly experience in a specific environment get attached to that environment. So if you lie in bed anxious and awake night after night, your brain learns, through a process called classical conditioning, that bed equals anxiety, bed equals wakefulness. This is why people with chronic insomnia can often fall asleep anywhere, the couch, a chair, but the moment they get into their actual bed, they're completely wired. That's not weakness, that's a learned association. And learned associations can be unlearned. Now let's slow down for a second, because I want to walk you through what actually happens in your body's chemistry during this loop, not over weeks, but within hours of a single difficult night. It starts with cortisol. Under normal conditions, cortisol follows a predictable daily rhythm, higher in the morning, gradually declining through the day, hitting its lowest point overnight while you sleep. But when you're anxious and sleep deprived, that rhythm gets disrupted. Cortisol stays elevated when it should be dropping. Studies show that even one night of disrupted sleep can elevate baseline cortisol the following evening, meaning you go into the next night already primed with higher stress chemistry before a single anxious thought has even appeared. Then there's GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, your brain's primary calming neurotransmitter. GABA quiets neural activity, it reduces anxiety, it supports the transition into sleep. Research suggests that chronic anxiety and poor sleep are associated with altered GABA signaling, meaning the very system that's supposed to tell your nervous system it's safe to rest may become less efficient the longer the loop continues. This is why, after weeks of anxiety-driven sleep difficulties, it can genuinely feel like your brain has forgotten how to wind down. The neurochemical infrastructure of calm gets worn. And then there's norepinephrine, closely tied to the fight or flight response, which, when elevated at night, is associated with more frequent awakenings and less time in restorative deep sleep. Less deep sleep means less emotional processing, less regulation, and the next day everything feels a little harder, a little heavier than it actually is. Researchers have also developed tools to measure how stuck in this loop someone actually is. One is called the pre-sleep arousal scale, which measures both physical symptoms, racing heart, muscle tension, and cognitive symptoms, racing thoughts, mental chatter, the inability to stop thinking. Studies consistently show that people with anxiety-driven insomnia score highest on cognitive arousal specifically. It's not just their bodies that are wired at night, it's the content of their minds. The thoughts themselves are the trigger, and that distinction matters enormously for what actually helps. So, what makes the difference? Let's start with what doesn't work, because most of what people instinctively try tends to make the loop tighter. Watching the clock? Every glance generates a new anxiety-producing thought. It's 2 a.m., I only have 4 hours left. That thought triggers cortisol. That cortisol activates you further. Forcing yourself to lie still and try to sleep? The effort of trying keeps your brain's problem-solving mode engaged, which is the exact opposite of the passive mental state sleep requires. Googling sleep tips at 3 a.m.? The blue light suppresses melatonin. The content keeps your cognitive brain running, and the act of urgently seeking solutions in the middle of the night reinforces the belief that you have a crisis requiring immediate action. Even going to bed early to catch up can backfire. When you spend more hours in bed than you actually need, you dilute your sleep pressure, the biological drive that builds the longer you're awake, and you increase the time spent lying awake, which deepens that conditioned association between bed and wakefulness. The harder you fight the loop, the more you feed it. But here's where the genuine hope is. The loop has a specific point where it's most vulnerable. Not at the level of sleep itself, not by trying to force better nights. The loop is most vulnerable at the level of your response to wakefulness. When you wake at 3 a.m., your brain doesn't just register that you're awake. This is terrible. I won't function tomorrow. This is ruining my health. I'll never fix this. That interpretation, that story is what fires the cortisol. That's what activates the alarm. And that story can be changed. This is the foundation of CBT-I, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for Insomnia. It's the gold standard treatment recommended by the American College of Physicians ahead of sleep medication for chronic insomnia, not as a supplement, as the first-line treatment. And clinical trials show success rates between 70 and 80%. CBT-I targets both the behavioral patterns and the thought patterns maintaining the loop. One of its most effective tools is stimulus control, directly addressing that conditioned bed equals anxiety association. The principle is straightforward. You use your bed only for sleep. If you've been lying awake for around 20 minutes, you get up, move to another room, do something quiet, and return only when you feel genuinely sleepy. It sounds almost too simple, but you are actively reconditioning your brain's association with the bed, gradually rebuilding the link between lying down and feeling safe, rather than lying down and feeling wired. Passionate and powerful motivational speaker, temporarily aligning your time in bed with your actual sleep time, which builds sleep pressure and makes falling asleep easier. Then you slowly extend the window as your sleep efficiency improves. These techniques feel counterintuitive. Spending less time in bed to sleep better sounds backwards, but the evidence is consistent and clear. And then there's the cognitive piece. Researchers call it cognitive restructuring. I describe it more simply as teaching your brain to stop treating wakefulness as an emergency. When you wake at 3 a.m. and the thought, "this is catastrophic," arrives automatically, you learn to pause and ask, is this actually true? What's the realistic outcome of a difficult night? Has one bad night ever destroyed my functioning as completely as I feared it would? The answer almost always is no. You're not forcing yourself to pretend you feel fine. You're genuinely examining the thought and finding its exaggeration. Over time, this changes the automatic response. The amygdala gets a different signal. Wakefulness is uncomfortable, but it is not a threat. When wakefulness stops feeling like a threat, the cortisol response softens. When that softens, hyperarousal quiets, and sleep becomes possible again. There's one last thing I want to leave you with because it ties everything together. The anxiety sleep loop feeds on attention. Specifically, the attention you pour into monitoring sleep, tracking it, scoring it, judging it, trying to control it. Researchers call the extreme version of this orthosomnia, an obsessive focus on achieving perfect sleep, often driven by devices that give you a score every morning. The irony is that the more closely you monitor and analyze your sleep, the more anxious hyperarousal you create around it. And the same principle runs through everything we've covered today. The more you struggle against the anxiety, the more you treat wakefulness as a crisis, the more willpower you throw at forcing sleep, the stronger the loop becomes. Sleep researchers call this the paradox of sleep effort. Sleep is one of the few biological functions that gets harder the more deliberately you chase it. The way out isn't trying harder. It's not more optimization or more information. It's understanding the loop well enough to stop fighting it and start working with your biology instead of against it. That means reducing the threat signal. Changing how you respond to wakefulness. Using tools like CBT-I to rebuild the conditions your nervous system needs to feel safe at night. And genuinely letting one bad night be just that, one bad night, not an emergency, not evidence that something is permanently wrong. Because the moment your brain stops treating it like a crisis, something shifts. The cortisol drops, the amygdala quiets, and your brain remembers what it already knew. It knows how to sleep. It always did. One important note, if your insomnia is severe, has been going on for a long time, or feels connected to trauma, depression, sleep apnea, or medication, please reach out to a professional. The tools in this series are grounded in solid research, but they're not a substitute for individualized care when that's what's needed. That's not a disclaimer to brush past. It actually matters. In the next video in this series, we're going deep into CBT-I itself, the specific techniques, the core protocols, and how to begin applying them. Because understanding the loop is the first step, and you just took it. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And if this video put words to something you've been living with but couldn't quite name, share it with someone who needs to hear it. They probably already know who they are.